Healing is a really difficult. When I finish and I've settled a case, my job on those four corners of the page are done, but the client's job is not done. They have to deal with this for a long time.
I'm very proud of the people of Altadena and how some had to run, some had to flee. Others said, no, we're going to stay and we're going to fight. And even after the fire, we're going to stay and we're going to fight. Altadena is not for sale.
Welcome to the Shaping Freedom podcast, where we dive into conversations that inspire personal growth, transformation, and clarity in challenging times. I'm your host, Lisane Basquiat. When disaster strikes, most of us look for safety, but there are some people that look for solutions and for ways to help, and for the people who are falling through the cracks of that disaster. In this episode of Shaping Freedom, I'm joined by Doug Boxer, an attorney and justice advocate, and Chris Holden, the former California Assembly member. And what we're going to talk about is what really happened in the aftermath of one of the largest wildfires in U.S. history, the Eaton Fires. Doug and Chris have been on the ground not just helping people recover their property, but fighting for dignity, justice, and recognition. Doug brings his legal expertise and personal fire to advocacy, having helped hundreds of families navigate the trauma, bureaucracy, and loss. Chris, whose deep roots in public service and community leadership have spanned decades, understanding what it means to push policy forward and what it costs when the system doesn't meet people where they are. Together, they've made it their mission to uplift survivors who were promised help and then abandoned by the very systems that were meant to protect them. This is a conversation about community trauma, about real advocacy, and the deeper meaning of freedom after loss. If you've ever felt like you were left to rebuild alone, this episode is for you. I do want to welcome you, Chris Holden and Doug Boxer, to the Shaping Freedom podcast.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah,
Great to be here.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Can you maybe, just to kind of set the tone and to bring some context to this conversation, what were the Eaton Fires and what happened?
So the Eaton Fire started on January 7th, 2025 at around 6:09 p.m. in the evening. It started in the face of a ferocious wind event, which was an expected wind event. The National Weather Service, 3 days earlier, had predicted this exact weather event would occur and issued its most highest level warning, called a potentially dangerous situation, PDS. That should have given Edison notice that their system was going to be under great strain. What we found, working with our experts and other lawyers, is that a set of transmission lines, which is sitting above Eaton Canyon, which had been deactivated and de-energized in 1971, 54 years ago, became energized because of its proximity to two towers that had power flowing through them that Edison did not turn off. That energy, through a process that is very well known, transferred from the powered line to the decommissioned line. It then sparked. Molten metal fell to the ground into the brush below, which was not properly maintained, and the wind took it from there, and we know what happened about the tragic circumstances. So from our perspective, my perspective as a lawyer, we have a culpable party, which is Southern California Edison, the utility, who's responsible for all the mayhem that occurred that evening and the following day.
And what moved you to act?
Well, from my perspective, I've been doing utility spark wildfire work and representing over 20,000 people who have had their lives turned upside down or even lost lives as a result of these fires that have been occurring, unfortunately, almost every year. And so the first thing that wills me to act is knowing that these families have been devastated and there's something that we can do about it as the law. I'll let Chris speak to his personal quest here, because I think it's an extension of what he's been doing with his life. But that's really ultimately what initially gets me motivated to get up in the morning and do this, is to help people get justice that they deserve.
And what about you, Chris? What was it about this that moved you to act?
Well, that night, even though where I live is outside the burn area, the winds and the smoke and the ashes were traveling well beyond the burn area. And we had, quite frankly, a lot as a family that we were trying to understand what we needed to do, because even though we were well into Pasadena and outside of Altadena, the intensity of the smoke that was filling our home kind of moved us to action. We weren't, our neighborhood wasn't called for evacuation, but we self-evacuated just because we had friends who were relocating from Altadena who were asked to leave their neighborhood. And we just made space until we realized that our home was not really going to be conducive. It wasn't until the next day. So we got a hotel downtown LA. We stayed there. There was a lot of concern in the ensuing at that time, because there was also reports of people who were starting to loot in neighborhoods and breaking into homes, and not necessarily ones that were on fire, but people who had fled. Once it became clear the next day, just the magnitude of the devastation, and how neighborhoods were still burning, gas lines were still on, starting to hear reports from people that I knew who fled when they didn't know they had to flee, that they thought they had time to maybe gather some personal items and then realized that they did not.
Yeah.
We learned in subsequent days that the alerts that were supposed to go out to give people ample notice weren't happening. So as a public policy person, that's where my head goes right away too, is that my mind is wrapped around, well, what happened, what failed in that space? Because, fires happen, but nothing has ever occurred quite like this, where the fires would leave the canyon and the upper parts of the mountain area and come down into the community. Not in any of the San Gabriel Valley areas that I represent did anything like this ever happen before. And so it caught a lot of folks off guard, but there are still a lot of questions that are in need of answer. What happened? Why did it happen? Why was it so apparent, where the LA Times did a story to highlight those who were on the west side of Lake got hardly any, if any, notice at all. And that's where the greatest number of people who lost their lives took place. So even though we're now past the 6-month mark, there are still a lot of questions to what happened that night and the moments that preceded the devastation moving as quickly as it did. And as Doug pointed out, the winds were at 80 to 100 miles an hour. We took things down at our home because we knew that it was going to be a heavy impact. So it is still baffling why Edison did not look to this as an opportunity to shut down the power, because if they had, we're just dealing with roofs that are in need of repair and not lost lives.
Right. So what is LA Fire Justice?
It's a consortium of lawyers. It is a recognizing that people's lives were turned upside down, and they lost when they should not have. This did not have to happen the way that it did. And for a group of individual lawyers like Doug and Michael Watts, who have been a part of addressing these kind of calamities in other parts of the state, Hawaii, representing over 20,000 victims of wildfires specifically, that their expertise becomes very critical in terms of folks understanding what their rights are and what the process should be and how best they could be taken care of going through this. Having lost what they did, having insurance companies failed folks and coming up short in what they thought they needed, others who, families who generationally have passed down their homes and over time actually paid off their homes and took a risk not having insurance, now have lost everything.
Right.
And so stepping into that gap and to making sure that they understand what their rights are and that they're protected through this process. And that at the same time, we go beyond just being a law firm. As much as it is important to focus in that space, we're learning so much about how this fire has impacted the lives of people, how they're trying to now figure out what their next looks like. And so when you have families who are saying, hey, I don't know if I can wait, and are starting to sell their home, and they're having, unfortunately, to sell it on the cheap, to have, and I'm talking about land, the property that they own, to have people who are saying, I want to rebuild, but then the federal government says, well, we're not going to test the soil. And so now their choice is, okay, if I want to rebuild, now I have to build on potentially contaminated soil. So those are some of the indication of some of the policy issues that are emerging from this that are causing great concern. And we are in a unique position to be able to at least explore and hopefully get some good answers in that space as well.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that it's been 6 months, which is unbelievable. This year has been flying. And I remember, I'm down in San Diego, but I remember those few days and how horrifying it was. And someone who I work with had his family owned a home and in that area, and he was sick, and he's a contractor, and he pulled up, and I was teasing him about being sick and coming to my house, spreading germs, because he was, it's like, you don't want to sit at home and don't come up here, with your boogers or whatever. And just to look on his face, and he described having heard from the tenants, I guess, that were in the house, that this was going on, and it was, how rapidly everything was moving. And they'd moved his mother, who was elderly, out of the home right before these folks went in to rent it. And just kind of watching and having that in the days that followed, so many people who were impacted by the fires that happened up here in LA. And it's 6 months later, but if you've lost everything, it's 6 months later, and all of the initial support, a lot of times, like we live in this world of nowness, and it's 6 months later, and there are people who have lost their homes, who have lost everything, who are still struggling to figure out how to rebuild and whether or not to rebuild and what to do and all of that. I commend you for doing the work of standing for those families and for those, for the injustice in that act of God or not, or act of negligence in some ways. What is it that you'd like for people to know about this work of disaster recovery, not in the initial 2 or 3 weeks, but 6 months, a year out, 2 years out?
Well, let me just jump in, having done this before in 10 fires, and you're right. There's initial flood of support for victims and survivors, right? Which just shows how benevolent our communities are. Both people, corporations, nonprofits all flow in, and resources are available to people in the immediate aftermath. But soon thereafter, those resources leave because there's another disaster. There's
something else happening.
Right? There's always more that these organizations need to do, and these communities sometimes feel stuck and left, abandoned. I wish, as a lawyer, that the civil justice system worked much faster than it does. Unfortunately, it doesn't operate quickly. You have to methodically lay out your case. You have an opponent on the other side who's not necessarily incentivized to move fast. Our job, my job as an advocate for people, and I appreciate you using that word because that's what we do. We are advocates. Our job is to try to make it go as fast as we can. How do we do that? By putting pressure on Edison, on the defendant in this case, with overwhelming evidence of what started the fire. The good news is that we're pretty close to there. Okay. But what do I tell families? We are honest with them. and we tell them that this might take a little bit of time. That said, our organization, LA Fire Justice, really brings a holistic approach to this litigation. At the end of the day, I'm a lawyer. That's what I have to do. But we also surround ourselves with a team of people who understand insurance issues, who understand the NGO space, who understand government. Chris was, for many years, an elected official. He's now a recovering elected official. I come out of a family with a mother who was an elected official. So I know how those forms of government can provide assistance, right? And then we also are providing mental health services to our clients. Actually, we're providing mental health services, access to something once a month in our office to try to give people the additional resources that they need so that they are not just waiting around for the litigation to ultimately give them the resources they need, maybe to rebuild their homes or their lives. Mm-hmm. So as much as I wish I could, wave my magic wand and give them the resources out of Edison's bank account, we can't do that. We have to follow the process. Yeah. And we're making good progress there. But I think it's the work of the community at large to ensure that the members of that community have the resources they need to be able to continue to stay in the community. The last point I'll make, it's a long answer, but I think it's important to make. Every one of the communities where I've gone in to provide legal assistance to get justice for people are communities that are made up of people, not buildings. The buildings are important. They house the people. They house the businesses. They house the services. So we need to get the buildings rebuilt so the people who made up those communities can move back into the community. And that's what's happened in Northern California in the community of Santa Rosa, in the town of Paradise. People have the resources ultimately to move back in. It's happening in Lahaina on the island of Maui, a place that's very similar to Altadena. Mm-hmm. Multi-generational families who are living in one building. The aggregation of wealth through the ownership of their home, which was so critical to Altadena's families that we just cannot ignore. And we cannot let that simply disappear because people don't have the money it takes to pay their property taxes, right? We have to figure out ways to get folks those resources so that those communities come back and the fabric of the community, the people, stay. Because otherwise we lose something that's super special about this place on the planet Earth. So that's what kind of gets me up in the morning, to continue to fight hard and make it happen as quickly as we can.
Speaking about the humans behind all this, I'd love to know what brought you to this work. Like, tell me a little bit about your background and what brought you specifically to LA Fire Justice.
Well, for me, as you know, I've been in politics for about 36 plus years as an elected. My dad, former LA City Council member and State Senator Nate Holden, was someone who was much a guiding light in my life to the responsibility to be connected to public service, underscore service. And I remember he always would say, it's not where you serve, but how you serve. So being elected was not necessarily the driver, but being in a position where you could use your skills and your gifts to hopefully make a difference in people's lives. I, even today, have a hard time saying no to someone who has a problem, even though it's completely outside of my bailiwick, only because for so many years, you want to make yourself available and present. So when this opportunity came to me, it was really sort of at a time when I was looking at what my next would be. I had just termed out of the legislature. I had served 12 years. I had very important posts while I was there, from a majority leader to chair of utility and energy and appropriations chair. So for my 12 years, I was in a good place to understand from leadership what the big picture looked like, but also in our districts to be very much engaged. I had the opportunity, I won't say the pleasure, but the opportunity, because it comes out of a tragedy, when Pacific Gas and Electric had, going into their most recent fire at the time, wildfire that they caused, they were downgraded to junk bond status, which meant that in terms of the marketplace, they were a risk. And when they then made it clear that they had no other options but to file for bankruptcy, then that sent a ripple not only around California and the nation, but Wall Street. You cannot have the largest utility in the country in bankruptcy without that creating amazing ripples and catastrophic ripples to your own economy in your state. And with 3 investor-owned utilities basically providing power to 80% of California's customers, if the market isn't stabilized at some point very quickly, then San Diego Gas and Electric would have potential challenges of staying solvent, as was Edison. So we had to come up with a strategy to stabilize the market, but also to protect the victims of wildfires. AB 1054 became that tool. And the governor and his team, and he had to bring in outside support to help us dig deep into creative solutions that would accomplish that balance. This bill was able to do that by creating a fund, a victims fund through a wildfire mitigation program that utilities would have access to going forward, to make sure that the victims of the current fires that PG&E had caused and had put in dire strait, they would not have access to the fund unless they were able to negotiate some type of a settlement with the victims of that particular fire. Going forward, which is where we are now, Edison, if they find themselves have been prudent managers, would then at least have, but they responsible for the fire would have access to the fund, but they would then have to put up the first $1 billion. The fund is structured from $10.5 billion from shareholders of the 3 utilities and $10.5 billion for a $21 billion fund from the ratepayers. And that's established over a fee that's been in place for since the deregulation period. And that is supposed to generate upwards of $10.5 billion. So that's how we get to the $21 billion. I take pride in knowing that we were able to do something that now other states and other communities are looking at as an important model for stabilizing, especially in a time when climate change is exacerbating and accelerating wildfires to catastrophic wildfires. Wildfires that would stay in the canyons are now making their way down into communities like Altadena. And so this is creating a whole nother dynamic of how we view fighting these wildfires. You'll hear from the first responders that with the winds moving as quickly as they were that night, embers were being shot over their head into communities closer to me. And so their ability to fight that kind of an event was quickly realized that this was not going to be something that they could get ahead of, because they weren't sure how to even position themselves to contain it. They needed to then start evacuating. And that process, again, yielded some clear evidence that we weren't prepared. When I say we, the collective we, but the county and the alert system, and then how we would respond in the days after. And I will say this, just as another point, Altadena has really demonstrated, the Altadenans, and Doug alluded to it, it's the people to a factor of 100, because this was a community that said, we're not going to wait for the government to tell us with a task force or some kind of instructional body that here's what we need to do and that type of thing. Certainly FEMA was engaging, and the Army Corps of Engineers were engaging. But organically, communities started to come together. Block captains were formed to make sure that they were checking on their neighbors within their census tract. There was an organization collectively from a lot of different groups around Altadena to gather as much information so that they can share it with their neighbors and say, here's what you need to know. Here's how you need to engage with FEMA so that your lot can be cleared. Here's what you need to know about where to go to get diapers and bottled water in those ensuing days. Where you can go to get clothes. People lost everything. If they walked out of the house with a shirt and pants on and shoes, that's all they had. And so there was a period of time where organizations that we're familiar with, Red Cross and others that were intervening as they always do, but churches and community-based organizations locking together with Hope the Mission and other organizations that usually operate in this space, but they were able to extend their reach because so many in Altadena were sort of coming together to help their neighbors as the night of those fires, where people stayed at their homes, watering their roofs and their neighbors' roofs. So if the fire department couldn't get there, they were doing everything they could and taking in smoke in a very dangerous way. That's a spirit that, that comes out in crisis, but I'd like to see more of that, if you will, around the world, of people treating each other in that kind of way. But I'm very proud of the people of Altadena and how some had to run, some had to flee. Others said, no, we're going to stay and we're going to fight.
Yeah.
And even after the fire, we're going to stay and we're going to fight. Altadena is not for sale.
Hey, it's Lisane. I created Protect Your Peace, a boundaries and accountability workshop, because I know what it's like to feel stretched too thin and how it feels when you're saying yes to everyone else, but feel like you're disappearing in the process. This workshop is your invitation to pause and to come back to you. In just 2 hours, you'll learn how to set boundaries that reflect your values, protect your energy, and strengthen your voice unapologetically. You'll also learn how to hold yourself accountable in a way that builds self-trust and momentum, not burnout. This is the kind of space I wish I had when I was deep in the cycle of over-responsibility and simply just doing too much. So I created it for you. Join me for Protect Your Peace, live or on demand, and walk away with tools you can use immediately to get back in alignment. Click the link in the show notes to register. You deserve to protect your peace and your power. From the outside looking in, what I observed was that spirit that you're referring to, where people were grateful to have their lives, and they talked about the fact that they could rebuild. I also observed how this seemed to be a disaster that really brought people together. I know people who had families staying with them because, the ability to find a hotel or an Airbnb or whatever became less and less likely after just a couple of days. And it just seemed to be this tremendous community event, something that whether you were directly impacted by it or not, it seemed like LA just came together in support of each other for this event and for this disaster. And I think that at the end of the day, you're right, like there's the law and there's the process and you have to wait and insurance and all of that. But 6 or 7 months into it, we need each other.
Yeah.
Because we just don't have the structure, the infrastructure in place to support people at the level of support that that's needed in this kind of situation. Yeah. And I'm going to get to some of your backstory in a second. I just want to ask, for how long have you both been part of the LA Fire Justice, and what's your vision for your contribution to this cause?
Well, Doug has been there longer because he called me to see if I would want to join and be the CEO. So
you still have to answer the question, though, sir.
Well, no. Well, first of all, it was the values that I connected with, and which you've highlighted. When you have in that ensuing 30 days from the fire, 29 days out, there was a lot of really bad advertisement from law firms that was making its way onto social media. I wasn't a part of I wasn't locked into anyone. I'm still in that place where, trying to evaluate my options in terms of my next. But I remember seeing it, and it was incredibly offensive.
Yeah.
And so when I talk about values, and when I get a call from Doug and he says, look, we want to talk to you about an opportunity that we are creating here to bring healing and justice to the community. My wife and I thought that was very important. And the way that he framed it from the standpoint of justice was kind of an end result of, we're going to fight for you, because we know, having done this before, the systems will fail. People will fail you. And the utilities are really accountable to their shareholders. So we're going to fight to get what you're entitled to get you back to whole or as close as possible. So for me, when I had an opportunity, my wife, to go hear their very first, it turned out, their very first town hall, Erin Brockovich was a part of that. And she's still a part of the information and advocacy part of LA Fire Justice. I realized that, okay, they're in here to fight multiple fights. And that justice part isn't just a throwaway line to make it sound good. It is something that they are making as a part of their ethos, that this is who they are. And then when I saw the video that they spent, rather than advertising to the community and saying, hey, we're another law firm, come talk to us, they basically stayed out of that space for 30 days. And then they spent that time trying to figure out how the fire started and spending resources to understand, so that they would be in a position to tell Edison it wasn't an encampment, like they said that night.
Yeah.
They were better off just saying, we don't know. But to start throwing out reasons, and then to have the ability for LA Fire Justice to say to the entire community, as well as to Edison, no, that's not how it started. I put myself in a position of, if you will, that night, not having been associated at that point with LA Fire Justice as a juror. If I'm sitting in a courtroom and I'm hearing this presentation, Michael Watts did not get through but maybe a half of the presentation. And I leaned over to my wife, Melanie, and said, these guys are guilty. And then when we had a chance to sit down, I said, you're fighting for the underdogs. You're fighting for the folks who usually are left out, whether it's in Katrina or you name it. Communities of color sometimes are the ones that get it on the chin.
Yeah. And
I was impressed with the kind of effort. And there was another fire that was happening in the Palisades that night, but they were locking onto Altadena. And that was very impressive to me.
So, Doug, you've had so much experience that obviously this community has been able to benefit from, because it sounds like you were able to jump in there. You know what to do to get the ball rolling. But just take a couple of steps back here. How did you get to a place where you started to build that experience? Like, what brought you here?
Yeah. For me, the word justice, Chris talked about that word and what it means. I bring that fundamental view to this picture because at the end of the day, it is about a group of people who have been harmed through no fault of their own, for actions and inactions taken by others that should have never have been the case. And it helps to describe where I come from, I think, in order to get to the answer to the question you're asking. Like Chris, I am the child of an elected official. My mother was U.S. Senator Barbara Boxer. My career started in advocacy when I was being pushed in a stroller protesting the Vietnam War in San Francisco in the late 60s. And that was her foray into that space. And, you know, so it's been in me. The fight for justice has been in me even before, you know, I could even know. Combined with my father, who was a lawyer who represented injured workers, I was taught at a very early age to respect working people, for the right to organize, unionize, for an honest wage, for benefits, to never cross a picket line. Mm-hmm. Myself becoming in my first real job, aside from babysitting, you know, working in a grocery store as a proud member of a union. And so it took me a while to get to where I am today, for me, I think, to be able to instill all those values that were put into me at an early age. But I always tried in my community. I live in Oakland, California. Whether it was serving on my local planning commission or trying to keep the Oakland A's in Oakland as a volunteer, I've always felt that connection to community and trying to do what's right by the community. But while I was having a career in government affairs work generally and helping companies figure out how to navigate their challenges with government and regulation, it really wasn't until 2017 when I hooked up with this trial lawyer, Michael Watts, that Chris has referenced. And he said, I think your utility up there in Northern California started these fires, and I think these people deserve justice. How can you help? And I'm like, well, I'm from Northern California, from the North Bay, the Bay Area. So we got to work. And I found my calling at 50-something years old, right? I mean, it's a weird thing, right? How life just works. And since that time, 2017, I've been working on wildfire work. And, you know, the sad part about it is that it keeps happening, right? Utilities keep sparking wildfires. There are two principal things about doing this work, sort of that keep me going. One is to get justice for people who've been harmed through no fault of their own. But the other is to try to change the behavior that creates the conditions under which they're harmed. And lawyers, you know, get a bad rap, right? And there's good reason for that. Not every lawyer is perfect, right? But we made PG&E a better company. They're not perfect, don't get me wrong. But we put in place a bunch of things through the litigation and with the help of public policymakers like Chris and the governor at the time to try to lay a foundation to try to stop this from happening. It just so happens Edison, unfortunately, didn't follow what they should have followed. They had the tool to turn the power off. They had the regulatory approval to do it, and they didn't do it. And so we're going to shine a big, bright light on that because that's incredibly important. We're also going to make them pay billions of dollars, right? Because that's the harm they caused. The hope in that process is that by doing so, by paying billions of dollars, by having the light shine on their behavior, it encourages them to change that behavior in the future.
Yes.
And their board of directors and their shareholders who do not want to pay this money. But it was not anybody's fault except for the people in that C-suite who made those decisions, that set of days that could have stopped this from happening. And so to bring it full circle, this is what I've decided to do at the last or later chapter, you know, of my life. And I hope that when it's all said and done, not only have we gotten justice for the people of Altadena, but that we try to avoid these things from happening again, so the next community isn't faced with this. And I'll just take one point of personal privilege. My sister lived in Malibu and lost her home in the Palisades fire. She's a renter without insurance, which is the hardest people to represent. And, you know, the sad part about the Palisades fire is that there's no culpable party on the other side. We couldn't figure out who was responsible for that, right? Mm-hmm. And Chris talked about how the first 30 days, we don't do any advertising of our firms. We try to figure out what happened. It's because you can't get it wrong.
Right.
You got to get it right.
Right.
You can't go tell a group of people, hey, go sue the utility, and then find out 6 weeks later or 2 months later or a year later that you were wrong, because now you've given all these people hope that there's going to be something at the end of this process. So we do the hard work to get it right. And I think that my history, our track record shows that we've done okay in that regard.
Better than okay.
In getting the people what they deserve. Yeah.
So what happens from your experience or your connection to them emotionally, to people and families, when they believe, rightfully so, that they've been kind of let down by the system? How do you, I know that you have a monthly a mental health Monday session to support those folks. What else is happening? And I'm asking this question, and some of it may seem obvious, but I'm asking the question just because these are real human beings. Like, we're talking about the amount of money that it's going to take to support these families toward rebuilding their physical home. But what is happening with the actual community members? What's happening with them today? What do they need? How can they best be supported?
I've sat across the table from countless, probably thousands of people at this point who have been through this. They're broken. And it's tragic. Our brains are not wired to flee from walls of fire.
That's right.
And they are truly broken. And the first thing I tell them is, look, I'm going to tell you what your legal rights are. You have to make a decision as to whether or not you want to join this litigation to try to get justice from the wrongdoer. But the first thing you need to do is take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm meeting with strong mountains, big dudes who are sitting in your office crying, or moms who want to be the backbone of the family but can't seem to get up in the morning. And so there's a whole bunch of self-care that has to happen. And that's why we do Mental Health Mondays. And that's why we turn people on to the types of resources that we have from either NGOs or government agencies, helping them with insurance issues. Because if you have insurance, that's where you should go first. That's how you actually get the resources. If you don't have insurance, it's FEMA, and it's very, very hard. And so it is the hardest thing that I do in the beginning of the process, is to sit across the table from people who simply have been through something that no one should ever have to go through. And they're looking at you maybe as a lawyer, but really just as another human being who is able to listen. And that's the biggest part of my job in the first few months, is just listening. And trying to direct them to the right places. But I know Chris has been a fantastic addition to the team, because he brings a set of experiences that no one else in the community has. But he's now experiencing things for the first time as well that he probably, as an elected official, you probably dealt with tragedy, but I don't know if you've dealt with it on this scale. So
no, this is, I think probably the real challenge when you're sitting and listening to the stories, and everyone has somewhat of a unique story, but it's the ones where they almost don't have to tell their story because it shows on their face. That disheveled look, that what did I just go through, that I'm stunned, that if I move a little bit this way I feel a little dizzy, I'm not balance, my life has been destabilized, that I may be able to at some point sit with folks like at LA Fire Justice and try to think about and talk about what my loss was. We try to encourage them to start now, to try whatever pops into your mind, so you can so we can be in a best position of getting what you lost returned to you in some form or fashion monetarily. But there's so much that people have lost that they're never going to get back. It's what they call priceless. Photos, keepsakes, generationally passed jewelry or artifacts, that pictures of their grandfather from World War One, those type of things, lineages that are established in photos and family reunions and things along the lines that those are memories that are going to either have to be held in their thoughts, or if they happen to have it on a cell phone. But if it was something passed down generationally, it's gone. A good friend of mine who attended the same high school that I did and had played basketball at Pasadena High School, where I attended, and interestingly and coincidentally, Michael Cooper, who's come back out and does some really important things to let the community know he's there as well, and watching and being supportive. So there's that. But when I talked to this individual, and he loved basketball and still loved it today. I don't know how much he loves it today, because so much of what he was about was lost from those years that he played it in high school. Pictures, awards, things of that nature that he put a lot of value behind. And so when you come to grips with that, when you hear from people who are sharing with you that night they have a video, and they show you the video that they're fleeing from their home, that the back part of the home is on fire as they run out of the front part.
Yeah.
The mental anguish that they are enduring in that moment is something we say, you don't want to say hold on to it, but it is part of this case too.
Right.
It is part of the experience and what damage that fire has done to people on an emotional level. So there are lanes here that we are very equipped to navigate through. But like with Mental Health Monday, we thought it was important that for the wellness of folks as they are finding themselves in now, that they have at least an outlet, that we can provide a service in this space to have professionals come in and talk about a variety of areas of what trauma looks like, and how to start making their way as best as possible to a more sturdy place emotionally. So those are elements that we take to heart. People that I've personally known, schools that burned down that I attended. So it's all very personal for me, because I grew up in these communities of Pasadena, Altadena, and playing on those earlier years in basketball leagues, after school programs that you play another school, that type of thing. You're just a young kid. But those are memories that I have. And I know that for so many who've had to go through these type of challenges, it's real, and it's and it impacts on you, as best you can, to try to be there to support, because some of these folks, and their families, and you now are hearing their tragic stories. It's hard to shake it.
Yeah.
Let me add one additional thing that we're doing, which is interesting and unique. We've got a program we're sponsoring called Ashes and Echoes. Okay. It's an oral history project, where if there's a member of the community who's been impacted, devastated, they'll come in and they can tell their story to we're recording it, video and audio, and it'll become part of a program, a living oral history of what happened. And sometimes different people react different ways. Sometimes people want to tell their story. Like, this needs to happen. Yeah. I need to tell my story. It's part of their cathartic process. Other people are very much insular and don't want to do that. But I just thought of that might be something that might be interesting to your listeners too.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it comes down to the story, and sometimes it's the story that happened up until the disaster hits. But then there's another chapter that happens afterwards. Yeah. Where real leadership kind of has to come out, where and when you have to lead your family in a different way. How do we make sure that these communities aren't just, because again, we're talking about the physicality of a building and that kind of infrastructure, but how do we make sure that these communities are actually restored? The community, involved in the Eaton Fire or impacted by the Eaton Fire, or in Lahaina, or any of these other disasters.
Well, a lot of that's going to be how effective local government, in this case, because it's Altadena and an unincorporated area, that the governance support is through the LA County and the LA County Board of Supervisors. It's the kind of programs that they can start to initiate for those who are looking to rebuild. How effective can they facilitate a review of applications, get those approved out of the process, and get people to a place who are ready and able to start that rebuild, to do so without unnecessary delays. I know that they're working hard to try to make that happen. I know the governor has made that a key directive in terms of state oversight, that not to put up unnecessary barriers for folks to get back to rebuilding. I know that they have established different styles, because Altadena was a conglomeration of a variety of different architectural styles, from Spanish to Jane cottages to bungalows and craftsman style, frame and stucco, depending on what era. But all of that together made it from an architectural standpoint, made it a very interesting community. You would have high-end homes in some neighborhoods and all across Altadena and the foothills, and some that are more modest. But how quickly one can get through a process and get back to taking control of their land, being able to rebuild, for some, that is a big deal. And just to see that, and I will give a shout out to the Army Corps of Engineers and to FEMA, the process of how quickly they've gone through Altadena, cleaning up the sites and now making their way to the commercial sites.
Wow.
I think is it's noteworthy. But I will put an add-on to that. What about the soil? If we can understand that the soil is clean, or clean to an appropriate standard, that makes sense. But if you're expecting people to build on dirty land, that doesn't make sense.
Not at all.
I would look to the experiences that some of these other impacted communities have had to answer the question. And let me give you a couple examples. In Lahaina, you have a Native Hawaiian population, which was severely impacted. And if you know anything about Hawaii and its history, it's a little bit of tortured history because of the influence that settlers and people who've come over and statehood and everything else has had on the Native Hawaiian population. There was an opportunity. I don't want to call it a silver lining, because there's no silver linings when your community is destroyed and 102 people are killed. But there was an opportunity there to hit the reset button a little bit. And I think that the same thing happened in Paradise. The opportunity to hit the reset button means that a community like Altadena, which is now facing this long process of rebuilding, has the opportunity to come together as a community to figure out what their community wants to be.
Yeah.
Do they have it in them to come together as a community, have disparate groups of people, to figure out what they want, to solve maybe the issues that they had previously, right? I called it an opportunity because sometimes people don't take advantage of that. They may get in their silo. I'm only speaking from someone who's observed it from the outside, right? In Santa Rosa and Paradise, where this is now 7-8 years later, right? And where Lahaina, we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary. I've seen them seize the opportunity to try to solve some of the issues that might have been lingering. And so I think while we're really early on in this recovery phase of what's happening in Altadena, I think the kernels or the seeds are there for this to happen. And I think there's leadership. There's probably some leaders that we haven't even seen yet, actually, that will end up coming out of this. and future leaders of this community who will have the ability to navigate the challenges and try to come up with some cohesive view of how we look and how we create a better society and a better community. And for that, all I'll say is, from my perspective as a lawyer, it's simply to provide, the resources that come in through the litigation and through a settlement that allow people to be able to rebuild the structures. But in terms of their lives and the interconnections between people, that falls on, as Chris said, on the community and their government leaders to try to bring them together in a forum where they can act in concert. So I'm optimistic about that, actually.
Yeah. I am as well. There is a community of community residents and business owners who've been really impacted, and that is the small business owner, especially if their building did not. It's hard to say it that way, but for those whose buildings are still standing, but the neighborhood and all their clientele is gone, and they still have a payroll to meet, they still have other obligations. They're in a very unique position right now, and they need help in a unique way as well to keep their business alive until the building of neighborhood starts to happen. We're trying to fill that we can't fill it, but we're trying to do the best we can to sort of recognize that issue. We're on the 23rd, if I'm shameless plug.
Plug away.
On August 23rd, we're going to have a block party. And this is in my neighborhood. I've been doing it for about 26 years or thereabouts, as a council member, a mayor, and then as assembly member, because it was also a resource fair. And I thought once I was out of office, then that probably means that we're not going to need to do this anymore. Until I was visiting one of the local businesses and I saw Webster's Pharmacy, and they had a number of local businesses that they were putting shelf space available so they could put their product out and sell it, whether it was candles or you name it. And so I thought, well, maybe this is an opportunity for us to take what was really something for the community, free of charge, come and have a good time, live music, resources of the community so you can find out what's going on to meet your needs, and turn it around and make it a place where these local merchants and small business owners, and who also lost their home, but their business was in their home, those folks to have a place where they can set up a canopy and sell their products to the community, and for us to come in and support them.
Right.
Not just Altadenians, but people from within the range of your broadcast, to know that this is happening, and this is a way to help some of these local folks, whether it's the farmers market and the fruits and vegetables. I love the one in East Pasadena and the one next to me in Lackawanna, Flint Ridge, but skip it for a day and maybe come to this one evening. So you do your shopping there. Yeah. There will be merchants that have small businesses of arts and crafts. And then we have the other things, the live bands that will be performing, classic car shows. And obviously, the major supporter for this is LA Fire Justice to make it happen. And so we will have tables, but it's really just there to be supportive of the community. But for those who are have interest and want to understand and find themselves wanting to get more information, we're there to provide that in the fullness of what that represents for programs, as Doug's pointed out, rebuilding programs that we have that we're putting forth, workshops so that people understand what that looks like, to mental health. It's a holistic approach to addressing a crisis that I think is one where I, again, as I say, lines up with my values, and I'm proud to be a part of being a part of not just meeting the needs currently what the community is, but being a part of the rebuilding effort going forward.
I'm from Brooklyn, so you can have me at Block Party.
Yeah.
Block Party, August 23rd. Are they? Yeah, I'm from Brooklyn, and once Brooklyn's in there forever and ever. All right, can we talk a moment about setting the vibe? If you're anything like me, your space needs to feel good in order for you to feel good. And that's why I created the Shaping Freedom line of candles. It's not just about ambiance, but really about how you align yourself internally. These are more than just candles. They shift your energy. Whether you're journaling, meditating, working out, or just taking a moment for yourself, these scents are curated to ground you, lift you up, and bring you back home to yourself. They also have an 80-hour burn time and scents that are designed to evoke feelings of alignment and internal congruency. And we can all use that. Go to shop.shapingfreedom.com and check them out. Find the one that speaks to your spirit, or buy all four, and let them burn with intention. Two quick questions. One is, you mentioned justice and healing, right? And I love the fact that you mentioned both. What does justice look like to each of you, and what does healing look like?
I view justice in a lens as a lawyer, which means, and I have an ethical responsibility to do this for each and every client, which is to get them what they deserve from a wrongdoer. That's what gets me up every morning. Obviously, other people have notions of justice, which are maybe much broader. But in the lens that I wake up every day and do this in, that's my limited focus on this job. Healing is a really hard one to answer because I think it looks different for everybody. I've have clients who are seemingly healed relatively quickly once they get through the trauma and they get the help that they need to handle it. I have others who are broken forever because the process, the experience that they went through is so challenging for them to even comprehend that it's a lifelong effort to try to get your headspace back to where it was before it happened. Because remember, if you're listening, you're thinking about this, and you're looking around the house that you're sitting in listening to this, just look around and realize everything is ash and gone. Your wedding dress, your family photo albums, the medal you earned for winning the contest, the debate contest. Maybe you have a child who passed before you and you had their ashes in an urn, gone. For many people, that's overwhelming. Yeah. And they just can't do it. So healing is a really difficult one. I thank you for asking the question, because I think as people are listening, you got to think about, what is that healing mean for me? I have a very simple, what seems like a very simple job in the context of what my clients have to go through. I have to go prove that Edison started the fire, which we've done. And then I have to prove how that fire damaged each client, which we're in the process of doing. When I finish that and I've settled a case, my job on those four corners of the page are done, but the client's job is not done. They have to deal with this for a long time. And so I still talk to clients who we've resolved cases for. I've become friends, try to provide answers and direction for people, but it's a really hard question. And it's one that I probably need to continue to educate myself on what healing truly means. So I appreciate the question. I wish I had a better answer.
That's an answer though.
Yeah. I would say that justice, as I would view it through my lens, is that the people who have been wronged are treated with dignity and respect. These are folks who have lived lives that throughout their lives, dignity was always being taken away. Even probably trying to move into these neighborhoods, redlining laws as they were, made it very difficult for these families to even call Altadena home. And when they were able to identify a pathway and fight through the indignity that was the barrier sometimes to entry and to being able to be homeowners. Now fast forward to this time and this space, and to have this happen to folks who in many ways and often had their homes paid full and clear because they took pride. They were going to figure it out.
Yeah.
Own your home, you know? And they were able to do that. Respect that the process works, that and respects what they have had to go through. And in many areas of this, the recovery and how we're managing the different elements of where people are in this process, it's never happened before. So that's incumbent upon the governmental leaders to create something brand new.
Yeah.
Don't operate within the tight little confines of a box that, well, this is how we've always done it. Well, you've never done anything like this before. You've never had to encounter the hardship that it's creating and the tragedy and the trail of hurt and devastation, including 19 people who lost their lives. So break the mold,
Right.
Find the resources, make sure that the soil is clean, make sure that people who are getting resources to help them now. We talked a little bit about the philanthropic work and money that's been raised. I want to hope that that's getting out to the community and to the broad swath of people who are still dealing with the basic necessities, where drive-through distribution centers are still being packed. Mm. There are those who are looking to rebuild, and then there are those who are still trying to get some essentials that they still need, right, because they're bouncing around from hotel to ADU to friend's couch to this. So they're still in a distable place. Mm-hmm. The media may not be covering it, but that's what's happening.
That's why we're talking about it today.
That's why you're talking about it, and I appreciate that. And I think that that's really getting to their story, because there's so many different levels of that. Healing, as Doug would say, it's kind of like, how do you deal with the death of a loved one? I just lost my dad.
I'm sorry.
So, thank you. But when you're close to that moment and you're laying that person to rest that is not going to be calling you anymore, then you're still at that place where, well, I can't erase Dad's message because his voice is still on that.
I still have both of my parents passed away.
Yeah.
And my mother left a message on an answering machine that is sitting in the top of my closet at my house on the East Coast.
Yeah.
And my mother passed away in 2008.
Yeah.
Mm. My father in 2013. I have not been able to listen to that message.
Yeah.
And so as you were talking about what people have lost, I started going through my own life and the little, pottery thing, little ashtray that I made for my dad when I was like 11 that I now have. And, and that, the phone and the answering machine. And
yeah. Well, and just when you start thinking about it, even though it was 2008, you feel those emotions coming right back up. And I just think that, as Doug said, healing is a squishy, amorphous type of thing we may not be able to completely get our arms around, because the pain and trauma is so deep.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, my friend earlier in this conversation, that he just had a disheveled look, because every day you wake up and you're in a place that's not your home.
Yeah.
It's not, you thought of everything that you lost until someone sends you a picture and it's like, oh, there's that lamp. Wow, I forgot about that lamp, and it has a variety of value associated with it. So I just think that maybe if you're really young and you're the child, the parents, the older ones who are now obviously dealing with the managing of the problems and the issues and what next looks like.
Yeah.
The kids, it's like, okay, as long as I'm getting back to school and I connect with my friends, but even their lives have been disrupted.
Right.
For those schools that have burned down and those. So healing for young people is going to be a little bit different, and maybe it's shorter. For older, they're going to be carrying this for a while.
I think that justice is part of healing. I think that the how is part of healing, meaning that you are supporting this community and these communities with respect and with empathy and with an understanding that it's both about the physical home and the articles that are within the home, but it's also about their dignity.
Absolutely.
And their lives, and being able to have space created for them where they can heal together and figure out what that's going to look like. I think that allowing leaders to step forward within the community that can help to rebuild in a new way, whatever that looks like. I think all of that is part of healing. I think justice is within the healing. And then once you all continue to do all the work that you're doing, then each individual and each family can figure out how to round that out and what that looks like for them. But what you all are doing is such important work. And it would be one thing to kind of get into your office as an attorney or as the CEO. And I'm sorry, for some reason, it did not realize that you were the CEO until you mentioned it. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. That's okay. I was chair of appropriations, and I never wear labels. I may have the label, but I don't wear it.
Well, I wanted to acknowledge it.
No,
Thank
it's
you
all
that
good.
You're very gracious
good.
about it. I wanted to make sure that I did say that.
Well, I appreciate that. Can I just say one thing off of what you said?
Yes, please.
Because after our town hall from last week, and it was the day that Southern California rolled out a concept. When I say so, Edison rolled out a concept of how they want to engage with victims of the fire. I remember one lady came up to me and she said, I actually just want them to take responsibility and say, we screwed up.
Yeah.
We burned down your town. It was our equipment. The whole world knows it. And now you're kind of standing over there saying, well, sign this paper, possibly, if that's what it looks like. But you can't, we're not going to take responsibility. That is key to healing. Because if they would say what we already know,
right,
and they know that, we failed, there's redemption in that. There's the ability for people to heal, and then for them to heal too.
For everyone. That's
for
right.
everybody to heal. And I thought that was quite a takeaway for me. The lawsuit and everything and all the other different components are important, but the thing that she said was, I want them to take responsibility. And that, I think, for her, puts her on the path of healing.
Yeah. And I think you all are taking responsibility. You're taking responsibility for the communities that are affected.
Yeah.
You're taking responsibility for whatever skill set, whatever experience, whatever you have developed up until the time that you chose to join LA Fire Justice. And I think that's a remarkable thing. How can we support you?
I think that for us, the biggest challenge is operating in a little tiny corner of LA County with 8.5, 9 million people, when there's about 25,000 people that we need to communicate with, right? So we do our best through a team of very dedicated individuals to educate victims and survivors on their rights. You're doing it today with this show. And to me, just keep talking about what it is that's out there. Look, I'm a lawyer that represents people. There are good law firms out there. The most important thing that can come out of this is that every person who has been impacted by this utilities failures is to hold them accountable. I think there is some great wisdom in the notion that if they would just admit it, that would be a big part of the healing. I can't tell you they are going to do that. But if the entire impacted community acts together to take action, to try to hold them accountable, it sends a big message. And to me, that's every day, I just want to get this message out to as many people as we can, whether they come join our effort or whether they decide to go with another law firm. Everyone who's impacted should hold them accountable. And then we can begin to move forward to try to stop this from happening again and send them a message that you can't just do this with impunity, right?
Yeah.
Don't try to get out of your responsibilities. Don't go to the legislature and tell them you need to change the law because it's onerous. No, just change your behavior.
Right.
It's not that hard. Yes, people will be a little upset that they lost all the food in the fridge when you turn the power off. A lot less angry than killing people.
That's right.
And destroying their lives and livelihoods.
That's right.
So, you're doing this. You've done a tremendous service to the impacted community. So I appreciate you for having us on.
You're welcome. And for those who are listening, how can LA Fire Justice get supported by the broader community, those who are listening, those who want to help, those who have resources to help, those who are looking for a way to be able to join forces and build community around this impacted community? What can they do?
Well, we are, unlike, I think, many of the other law firms that are out there, we have an office at 221 East Walnut, Suite 100. The lease has been signed for 5 years. We have a team of people who we are assembled and are assembling more that are from the community, that understand the community. And so if the need is to have legal representation, that's where we're located. And we're not going anywhere, but then people can drop in the number. I don't have committed to memory.
We can get that from you. We'll make sure that that's in the show notes, and we'll also send it out in the newsletter.
I appreciate that. I would also augment what Chris said by, if you are an organization that's providing resources to the community, we want to know. We send out, I draft a weekly update to our clients, which includes a section on resources.
Okay.
So if there is a food giveaway, a backpack giveaway, if there are other types of things where an NGO or even a business is supporting people who have suffered loss in the fire, we want to know about it. We will also show up at anyone else's event if invited to provide information about what we're doing. Okay. So that just extends our reach, right? We can do what we can do, but the one-to-many, which is what this show is about, the one-to-many is the way we reach the people who need assistance. And so, as Chris said, we have a team of people, community outreach representatives, who will show up at your events if you're bringing people together to disseminate either resources or information. We want to be there.
Yeah, and as we say, if someone happens to be an expert or a professional in the mental health space, we're putting together panels every month, once a month, and dealing with different levels and dynamics of that. And sometimes just reaching out to us, there may be not the right alignment of how we can, but we can redirect, because we now also, over this period of time, are developing a resource base of organizations and groups out there who are also looking for on the ground support. And so we can help in a variety of ways, and also directing folks to community-based groups that are really doing some great work out there.
That's incredible. I think the days of looking at Uncle Sam, I'm dating myself, looking at
the government,
looking at the government to take care of everything. Yes, there's a responsibility, there's an accountability to us as the people. And I think that one of the things coming out of everything that's been happening over the last few years is that the more we can depend on each other, the more that we can come together as community and support each other, the better we all are. Because I think that's the thing. That's the behavior that's really going to help us to move into the next chapter as a culture and as a society. It's us understanding that it's us and government. And we have to do it together. And for those of us who can or have the ability or the skill set, this is a rally cry to step up to this cause, and to step up to whatever it is that's happening, where we can come in and contribute, just as you two gentlemen have done, and the teams that you work with. So I want to thank you so much.
Well, you know what they say, it takes a village.
It does.
You know what, Chris,
It truly
I was just going to
does.
say, someone famous had a book called It Takes a Village.
It truly
Yeah.
does. That's what it looks like in action. I want to thank you all so very much. I know you're very busy, and the fact that you were willing to come, and I said this at the beginning, and I'll bookend with this is I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your willingness to share what's happening with this community and with other communities like it, unfortunately. And thank you for doing the great work. Really.
Thank you for having us. Really.
Yeah.
It's a
Appreciate
pleasure.
you.
It's good
Yeah.
to meet you.